like many people a year ago, I had that terrible 10 minutes of my life as you watched a man's life being extinguished. George Floyd, an American, a man in Minneapolis, man, frankly, none of us knew, but who has become a kind of wider symbol of injustice and why it needs to be addressed. And on that day, we saw, the two sides of humanity. We saw police officers who had sworn to protect the Constitution and protect and serve a community do the exact opposite. We also saw the humanity of Darnella Frazier, that incredibly brave woman who took that video that we saw, that I saw, that I freely admit reduced me to tears. And I have to say, I felt an immense pride when I saw protests erupt around Britain. Unfortunately, I was shielding and couldn't take part, but it was really clear to see that for a significant group of people in Britain, that injustice should not be allowed to stand, that we must stand up to prejudice, to racial injustice. It must come to the top of the political agenda. We must address it. We must do something about it. And frankly, that made me proud to be British, because that wasn't a kind of small-minded, petty nationalism. That was patriotism at its best. The desire for your country to be better. But a year on, where do we find ourselves? I mean, I think some institutions, addressed the issues raised by the protests, and you've seen cultural and business institutions, question the origins of their organizations and the impact that empire and colonialism has had on their current position, whether that be the National Trust or companies. I think that's a positive step. It's a healthy step. You don't have to denigrate Britain by simply questioning some of the ways that we as a nation got rich. And I think that's important. I think what's been sad is the government looking at this as a wedge issue to try and separate those from our kind of big cities and from our smaller towns. And I think whether it be the Sewell report or, this idea that statues need to be preserved, there is something rather worrying about a government that is scared to say our history, both good and bad, is something we all need to understand, because prejudice and injustice don't come from a vacuum. We know that Scots Protestants were sent to colonise Ireland. They treated the Catholics as second-class citizens, and they built plantations. They took those ideas to the US, and they treated the indigenous population and enslaved Africans in the same way. We know we impoverished Mughal India to enrich Britain, in the same way that we enslaved Africans to enrich Britain in the West Indies. It's important that we all know and understand this. It's important that we know that the expansion of our education system in the late 19th century happened at the same time as the growth in the ideas around eugenics and the racial hierarchy, those ideas that underpin prejudice today. But what do we need to do about it? Every institution in our country needs to address it, and it's for every Briton to deal with. It's not just a question for black and brown Britons, it's for all of us. I think the first and the easiest thing that we can do is start telling the story of how we became us, how Britain became a country of not just Smiths and O'Connells and McDonalds and Davises, but of Khans and Patels and Amars and Olatundes. That's important. as local parties, we need to welcome people from all of those backgrounds. We cannot call ourselves liberals and internationalists if we don't. We all need to say, what can we do to make our party look more representative of Britain in 2021?
Hello, my name is Maddie Planch. I am a Scottish Liberal Democrat member. When I first found out what happened to George Floyd in America, I think, like most people, I was horrified and appalled, but I do remember not feeling surprised. I think, unfortunately, police brutality and racism in the US and the UK is such that George Floyd was just a victim in a long line of this horrific crime, which is something that is insidious within itself. But I remember the outpouring of anger and solidarity and injustice that came from all over the world, that made me feel hopeful that real change could arise from this. I think that's certainly how I felt when protesting began in the UK. I think there's often a misconception that because racism is not as violent or as outward as it used to be, perhaps, that racism is a problem that we've moved past as British people, when unfortunately that is not the case at all. You only have to look to our very recent history to see cases like Christopher Alder or Stephen Lawrence, two black men that died within police custody. The fact that ethnic minorities and black people are far more likely to be in police custody than their white counterparts. I think we really need to address our history as a country, as an imperial power that actually created and co-opted these systems that oppress people of colour to this day. That's why I felt uplifted by movements like the Edward Colston statue being removed in Bristol, or the conversation around having more objective and rounded discussions about people like Churchill that we consider our nation's heroes. And I think a year on, these conversations are more common and they are happening in more public spaces, and that does give me hope. I think racism is beginning to no longer be treated as this taboo subject, which it just cannot afford to be anymore. I think people are more willing to have conversations like white privilege, and people are more willing to acknowledge their privilege, which is something that we all need to do. Even if you look at the events in Glasgow that happened very recently, that gives me a tremendous amount of hope and pride. But on the other hand, people like Lawrence Fox, dare I mention his name, gained fame and traction last year from claiming that white privilege didn't exist. And I think he was able to do so because a lot of people in this country feel like he is telling the truth, or that what he says rings true in their communities or their lives. And I think as Liberal Democrats, in order to build a more tolerant society, we need to make sure that we are actually reaching out to these people and having conversations with these people and understanding why they feel like they do. I think as well, it has become abundantly clear that with the Conservatives still in charge, proper change cannot happen. The Race report that was released recently, that was denounced by so many scholars for not acknowledging the institutional or structural racism that is clearly so pervasive in our society. The reason that I am a Liberal Democrat is because we, I think, are the best place to solve these problems of oppression and prejudice, we exist to build a fair, free and open society. And we need to get elected more. Because once we start gaining more power and more influence, I truly believe that we can tackle these problems head on. I also think that we need to make sure that we are actively listening to people of colour in our local parties, and not just superficially listening to them, but make sure that we are always proactively listening to them, because it is only through cooperation and empathy and connection that real change can happen, change that as a country people are desperately crying out for, and is desperately needed.
How do I feel when I saw what had happened to George Floyd? Sad. Immensely sad. You know, just so upsetting. Just so horrible. Brutal. Disgusted. But then it reminded me that this has always been an issue with Black lives. You know, it's you know, we have seen previously Black people you know, dying in custody. You're serving officers murdering, but nothing has ever been done. But, you know, what we saw last year and what had happened, sadly happened to George Floyd last year, was just one of the most worst things ever. You know, you've got someone kneeing on your neck and you're telling them you cannot breathe, and they are still kneeling on your neck. Disgusted. And this person is an officer of the law that is supposed to be there to protect us. Everyone. Wasn't the case. The protesting in the UK was an amazing thing because we saw everyone come together. We saw Black people, we saw white people, we saw Chinese people, we saw Indian people, you know, we saw Somalian people. We saw everyone come together and actually stand for something, which is justice for George Floyd and his family, but also justice for Black people. Because we realise as a society, we realise as a country, we realise as a globe that Black lives matter, does matter. Black people do matter. And that we need to do more to make them feel part of our society. To make them feel, you know, that, you know, just because you're a different colour skin, you're different from me. Because that is not the case. Literally not the case. And it was, you know, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. It was amazing. It was powerful. And it was just so aspiring to attend the march here in Birmingham, but also as well attend the march in London as well, which was just incredible. Absolutely incredible. Did it make a difference? I think it did make a difference because it got people speaking. You know, it got people coming together. And 1 year on, what has changed? Derek Chauvin was arrested. Finally, thank God. Finally arrested for what he did. And, obviously, has been locked up. Will be given a sentence soon. Justice. Justice we got. But then there's more than just justice. There's more work that needs to be done within the law, within serving officers, having that ability to kill someone while on duty and not being actually served justice. We need to see more of a change in that within the UK, because it's happened within the UK on many different occasions, but also as well within America, where it happens constantly on a daily basis. Black people are afraid in America to call police officers just in case they end up dead. You know, you have a department, you have a unit that is there to serve and protect you, not kill you. What we need to do, I think what we need to do is we need to talk more. We need to be open more. And people need to be aware of the situation. You know, people need to understand what people go through on a daily basis. And we need to do that more moving forward. And I think we will. I think we're slowly seeing changes within different sectors. Within my industry in the television world, we're seeing changes. More black people given more opportunities in higher positions. More black people on screen. We're seeing more black faces, which is absolutely fantastic in black productions. And we're talking more about it, which is what I enjoy. I enjoy talking. And we need to be reminded of what our actual past of history is and how cruel and nasty our past history was here in Britain. Going around looting, stealing, and then saying that we should be proud of that. Can we be proud of when we're stealing from a shop? No, we can't be, because it's not right. And we need to show more of a good example to the younger generation. People who will be here long before me, long before us. And as a local party, as a member of the Liberal Democrat, I think we need to see that as well. We need to see more black people given opportunities within the party, but also as well more black, Asian, ethnic minority members, coming forward, becoming a member. Not to feel that this is a party that's just full of a white community. No, that's not the case. It's a party, as a liberal party, it's a party that's full of many different people of colour. And that's something that the Liberal Democrat needs to do visibly and fast.
So when I first heard about the George Floyd events and as I was watching the news, for me it was really sad, because we've known about how incidents like this happen daily to tens of people across the UK, across the USA, a number of countries across the world where people are treated unfairly and unjustly, not just by the police force, but other parts of society too. And I felt really sad. And it pointed me to how much more understanding there is that we have to do. That how ill-informed we still are about the challenges different racial groups go through with regards to a number of different issues concerning their civil liberties. And this is one of them. And if anything, what George Floyd has taught us is how much more understanding we can bring to this situation. And just how much of a real challenge this is, how much pain there is, how much suffering there is right now that just has gone unnoticed, but also unaddressed. So for me, it was sad, but at the same time, a great opportunity to listen to all the voices coming out, talking about the pain and suffering they've gone through, and us giving them a platform to really speak, to help us see what we can do better. And when the protesting then started in the UK, of course, we had the COVID situation. Now, I love the idea that people can go out there and protest. The only concern I had was, would this impact the COVID restrictions? Would this impact the measures that the government have put in place? Because so many businesses during this time have shut down, the economy's been shutting down, and I just hope that this wouldn't spread the virus more. But in the actual protesting part, I thought it was brilliant that people around the world are uniting, and what we need is more unity and more togetherness and less division. And it's unfortunate that we had an incident like George Floyd to cause more unity when we should have unity anyway. But I think it's wonderful that we have the space to be vocal and be activists and talk about the issues that really matter, that sometimes aren't put at the forefront of the agenda or the priorities that we really need to tackle. And, I think a lot has changed as a result of what's happened now since George Floyd's death. And there's more awareness, there's more consciousness. And even now, how in the UK, they're looking to pass greater policy around the police's capability to do stop and search, to make sure that any stop and search that is done is more lawful, more equal, more fairer, and respecting each member of society regardless of their background. So I think a lot has changed, but to really say that has everything changed to the level it could, not at all. Because this is a conversation that I'll be having for the rest of my life. If I have kids, this is a conversation that they'll be having. That is every year, what can we do more and more? And I feel that the incidents surrounding George Floyd have been a really great springboard for us to have more of the conversations that we've neglected. And, I hope we just continue to do this. So in terms of what we need to do, and also what can local parties do better, it's about holding space for greater conversation. It's not shying away from the conversations that are difficult, because even the people I speak to who work in corporate organizations, when they try and hold initiatives on diversity and inclusion, they're shunned down because of a fear of upsetting people, or fear of getting it wrong, or fear of what if people don't like that we're now taking a stance towards these things. And they hold on to the outdated thinking. That's the thinking we need to crush. And the way we do that is by holding the space for people to have more safe, honest, real conversations about the blind spots we're going through. But not just any people, it's inviting people from different backgrounds, different races, different countries, different nationalities together to share their thoughts, to share their opinions. And especially in a local level within politics, it's so important that if you look at the area I'm from, in Southwark, we're proud to say that we're one of the most diverse communities in London. So what it's about is having focus groups, having initiatives that can bring the communities together and really feel heard, feel represented. And as I said, that could be focus groups, that could be talks, that could be lectures by people from, let's say, established and learned people from the Black community that are thought leaders and experts on racism and the initiatives they're bringing forward, through to lecturers, people that can really share insight about what members of society can do better, how they can understand the issues at hand better and be more respectful citizens, and also do our best to really bring consciousness forward. So there's a lot we can do, but it's just getting started on the first step, which is holding more space for conversation. But importantly, doing something that often we don't do that well in politics, which is really listening. So I look forward to seeing more of these ideas come into action soon.
I think that with the George Floyd incident, I can't say I was shocked, because I don't think I was. I think my main reactions were anger and disgust. So disgust at the way that he was treated by police officers, but I can't say I was shocked by it, because it is an issue in the US, and I lived in the US for 3 years as a kid, so I understand some of the racialized tensions that exist with, amongst certain communities, within certain communities, and a lot of it does play on socioeconomic demographics, but a lot of it is down to the color of your skin. And I was angry because it's just one name in a long list. I mean, I remember Breonna Taylor, and it's just one name in a long list, and it broke my heart, because a lot of people were discussing what had happened as if it was the first time it had happened, when, just because things aren't necessarily reported on a global level doesn't mean it's not happening. And I challenge people to go and Google, police violence, police brutality anywhere in the Western world, and there will be an example. When protesting began in the UK, I was in a weird way at ease, because I felt like at least people were acknowledging there was a problem. But I also felt that there was a disconnect, because at the beginning of the protests in the UK, a lot of people were not talking about racism in our police force and racism within our society. Be that, medical issues within schools, the rest of it. People were just sort of going, oh, well, that's a problem in the US. It's not a problem here. We're standing in solidarity. When actually, and I can say this as a woman of colour, when you live the reality that we live every day, I can tell you it is an issue. And it's only on occasion that it'll rear its ugly head, but you feel it. And you know that you're being treated differently because of the way you look. And there's nothing more gut-wrenching than knowing that no matter what you do, no matter how educated you become, no matter how well-off you become, no matter how much success you have, you will not be treated the same as your white counterparts. And that has to be said. And we have to recognise that in the UK. So 1 year on, what's changed? I think that there has been a normalisation around talking about racism in a way that, you know, the traditional methods, you know, I think of great programmes like Show Racism the Red Card and that sort of thing. There's a candidness of the way that we talk about it, and I feel like a lot of people who are white and who have what we're sort of coining in Wales as have that privilege are starting to listen to what we're saying. It might not be implemented within policy just yet in all areas, but people recognise that it's a problem, and people recognise they have a certain privilege, you know, to be able to not fear reporting something to the police, to be able to know that you're going to access as a public service and be treated the exact same no matter what you look like and what your background is. So I think we're at the beginning of this, and we need to keep going on this discussion, on this journey. In Wales, we were really lucky to have the Education Minister in the form of Kirsty Williams, who ensured that Black and ethnic minority history is on our curriculum. And it's not just teaching about slavery anymore, it's actually about, you know, what BME people, what Black and ethnic minority people have brought to Wales, and I would love to see that, you know, repeated across the UK, and we can attribute that to the Liberal Democrats, to the advisory groups that she put together to consult on this, and she worked with some amazing professionals in the field to ensure that future generations understand where certain dynamics come from and understand why things are the way they are, but also have the tools to challenge them. I think that's quite important. So what do we need to do as a party? Well, this goes back to my idea of being candid. We need to be candid about how we talk about racism, how we can't shy away from issues of police brutality within the UK. We can't shy away from incarceration rates. We can't shy away from, you know, more Black women dying in childbirth and how we work with policy around that. You know, there's so many areas that racism falls into, and we need to be the party talking about that, because at the moment no one else is. And a lot of BME, Black ethnic minority, or even just people of colour, are getting really disenfranchised with our political system, and I think that the only way they'll be brought back in is with local champions, with local change, with parties like us who work on the ground, who are there every day, who want to learn, who want to change. So I think that local parties need to ensure that they are going out there and going to the communities, because communities aren't going to come to us. And that might be, you know, ensuring that we have, you know, that we have diversity officers and local parties that are looking out for things. You know, the Federal Party puts out a diversity calendar every year with main celebrations, be they religious, be they historical, that connect to a diverse amount of diasporas that we have here in the UK. Be nice to see more local parties using them, or just keeping an eye on what's happening on that day, maybe locally. You know, do you have a local Eid celebration? Do you have a local Pride? Do you have, you know, is there a way that you can edge your way into that as Lib Dems, to be there and possibly sometimes be the only political party that cares? But that's not a bad thing. It means that we're there flying the flag for as many people as we possibly can. I think that we do need to ensure that local parties are abiding by the Older Ice Review and making sure that socials and meetings are accessible. You know, some people can't go to meetings in pubs. Some people, you know, need other venues. And it's been nice having meetings on Zoom, online, the rest of it. But actually coming out of COVID, we need to have a rethink of how we interact with each other, what kind of events we put on, and ensure that things are just more accessible that way. And we also need to ensure that, I think, that we're reaching out to young people in schools, because there isn't only sort of one criteria of diversity. The issue, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement and George Floyd, isn't only for adults, it's for kids too, and we're seeing a rise of racism in our schools. So we need to ensure that we're playing our part to, to stamp that out and educate young people, and get them active, because a lot of people saw what happened to George Floyd and felt angry that they didn't know, angry that they probably wouldn't understand, and angry that, a man's life was taken in such a violent way, in such an unfair way, and they wanted to do something about it. That's why we saw so many young people getting involved with Black Lives Matter and everything like that. But we need to ensure that we're taking that passion and applying it to other things, because people aren't just sort of one issue people. That might be the issue they were inspired by, but there's so much else that they would want to get involved with, and we need to be the party that's kind of bridging the gap. So if there is a local Black Lives Matter movement, go find them, because I'm sure there are young people, I'm sure there are people who are concerned, and I'm sure that there's work we could be doing with them. So I hope that helps.
I think when I first saw what had happened to George Floyd last year, my first thought really was not, again, how can this still be happening? It's 30 years since the Rodney King attack by the police in LA in 1991 now, and it was extraordinary and gutting to think that things over those 30 years, when we've seen so much progress in so many other ways in our society, it felt like structural racism and police brutality towards people of colour might not have really moved on. And I think it's very easy to become complacent about these things. We do live in a better world than we did in 1991, and it's easy for that to make you maybe not complacent, but certainly to sort of hide the fact that there are serious problems and serious issues still to do with racism that are structural. And this isn't to do with day-to-day people making. This isn't to do with people, making racist comments on the street necessarily, or the way that aspects of society are set up to be difficult for people of colour, which still continues today. But I think there have been great strides made. This is to do with structural racism and the way that the major elements of our society, things like the police, things like government, things like the Home Office, are still set up against people of colour and are unequal. When the protests began in the UK, I was pleased to see that this event, this awful event, had galvanised people's action in a way that I don't think we have seen for quite some time. That's naturally goes with the feeling of sadness that it's taken the death of an innocent man in awful circumstances to lead people to kind of get off their butt and do something. So mixed feelings really, but I think the fact that the outrage and the horror that people had, and seeing the sheer racism of the police laid bare in this way, with that awful video that we've all seen and is difficult to stomach, frankly, to watch, I think put a rocket up society and made people think we need to do something. So the protests, those protests went across the world, not just in the UK, but in all across the continents. There was a feeling of solidarity for what had happened to George Floyd. And that's a powerful thing and something to feel positive about, even despite the circumstances being absolutely abhorrent. It's difficult to say 1 year on what's changed. I think there's been a real sense that people were shocked by this awful incident, and the realization amongst many people, I think, are allies, that this is not one-off. This is something that perhaps they've been complacent at. I include myself in that. I think I've been complacent because we're all of us are to some extent privileged in various different ways. Being a mixed race person myself, my dad was from Sri Lanka, my mum was white and from France. I have not been exposed to the same level of racism as some of my peers. It's not that I haven't experienced it, I certainly have, but it's something that's really, I think I have been a little bit insulated from. And so, given that, I think that there was a real sense amongst people that there was a real positive energy, I think, at the beginning. Now, how's that sustained? I don't know. I think that complacency begins to come back, and it's difficult to quantify that at this moment. We've seen with the booing of footballers taking the knee how easy it is for people to become cynical and complacent about these, really important issues and really important actions. I think it has changed society, but perhaps not as much as maybe we hoped it would so far, and we need to keep that energy going. As Liberal Democrats, there are things that we can do to keep that sense of change going and to keep that outrage at injustice going. The key thing for me is visibility. I live in Wales, where out of 45, I think, candidates that stood across the Welsh parliamentary elections, I was one of only 2 non-white candidates. This isn't always a case of it being at the door of the party. We have a limited demography and a limited membership in Wales, but I think the key thing we can do is to encourage Lib Dem voters to become involved in local parties, to make them feel like they're welcome, and really be proactive in doing that, because it's from doing that Lib Dem members of colour will feel welcomed, will think that they will take the step into becoming involved into local parties, will take the step into potentially putting themselves forward as candidates. I should clarify that, although there were only 2 members, 2 non-white candidates in Wales at the last Senate elections, every single person who'd applied, who'd been approved in the candidacy, who was an approved candidate, had was chosen to become a member. So I think that, as a party, we are doing our best to do this, but there are more things we can be doing to proactively encourage Lib Dem voters of colour to become more involved with the party. And once visibility improves, we will find more Lib Dem. Once visibility improves, we'll have more Lib Dem candidates of colour. Once we have more Lib Dem candidates of colour, we will be able to better address the issues around inequality in our policy making, in our conversations, and we cannot do that until we have more BAME Lib Dems at the top table and at all levels within.
When I first heard about another black man dying at the hands of the police in America, my initial reaction was, well, here we go again. That reaction in itself is a slight indictment of how bad things are for some people of colour, but particularly black men in the States. Afterwards, when I saw the actual footage of George Floyd being killed, I was in shock. Several questions were running around my mind. How could a police officer have his knee on another man's neck and think it was okay? How could other police officers just stand by and let it happen? How did this situation demonstrate quite graphically how racism and prejudice seem to be embedded in some police officers' behaviours? And it became clearer as the weeks went by that this wasn't an isolated incident. There were many names that could be mentioned alongside George Floyd, although I suspect his case became symbolic of the issues for the sheer brutality of his death. As global protests followed, and there were protests held in the UK, I was happy that important issues were being raised and talked about. But I was also conscious that protests in themselves won't change the systematic racism that had brought about the death of George Floyd. There were issues that were deep-rooted in history, but they were played out on a daily basis. Systematic and institutional racism is an issue in America, and no doubt it is not that different in the UK. 1 year on, it is unfortunate to report that not much has changed. It is difficult to change so much in such a short period of time. Sure, the statues can be taken down, and the names of schools can be changed, but the issue of racism and prejudice is still here. and they manifest themselves in people's lives every day. We have a long way to go, and I believe it will take a generation or two. There are things that we can do now as a society and as individuals. We collectively, white people and people of colour, need to have mature conversations about the root cause of racism. Children should be taught the root cause of racism at school. They should be taught about slavery and empire from the point of view of the slave and the colonised. Media owners, and particularly social media owners, have important roles to play on how young people view race, colorism, prejudice, ethnicity, discrimination and racism. Who the decision makers are matters. Politics can have a role to play. Politicians certainly have a role to play, as do political parties. The people involved in politics and their lived experience influence how they make policies, what they vote for and what they vote against. Therefore, it is important to have diversity in our politics, in our business, media, industry, advertising, culture. And it will take some time, but it is doable. The Lib Dem Party can do its part too. They can champion the issue at all levels, from recruiting new diverse members locally to supporting potential MPs from a racially diverse background. One of the practical things they can do to encourage both of these elements is to improve the imagery being used. For example, the images used in our leaflets and videos are important. More than a box-ticking exercise, they should reflect modern Britain and all its diversity. This small but not insignificant change will demonstrate that we are open to all and will fight for this important challenge of racism and prejudice, which is so important for so many people. Thank you.
So I was asked to make this video about the BLM movement and what's going on that front. And I was asked, how did I feel when I first saw what happened to George Floyd? Now, I was hurt, shocked, saddened, but I also felt slightly redundant in that there wasn't really anything I could do about it. But in actual fact, after reading and speaking to people, listening to people, I realised actually something that I could do about it was to educate myself, to stop being passively, anti-racist, to start helping other people understand, to get involved in campaigns that matter. And so when it all sort of spilled out to the UK, I saw this as I thought it was it was amazing to see the solidarity shown between our sort of friends, family, brothers, sisters, cousins, showing how they felt about what was going on in the US, but also what's been going on in the UK and then across the rest of the world. And so it was described as a moment, and I think that was misinterpreted, and it was a moment. I think it was a moment of inflection, where we'd built up to this point, and we could either take some serious action and ensure that momentum, that fight for equality continues, or we get to that sort of point where it then just dips down again and we go back to the same sort of status quo as we were before, of it just sort of sitting in the background. And I think we have gone past that moment, and it's continued to grow, and it's here to stay. It's not something that's seen as a sort of blip in time. What's happened though? What's changed? I think that's slightly tougher to answer. I think a lot more people understand the challenge a bit better, but it's been the initiative, the sort of purpose of it has been drowned out or conflated with what is being described as a culture war, and worse actually. We've seen communities or peoples being pitted against each other by those that are in power, those that either in political power or media power, and they basically made us point the finger at each other you know, those you know, whether it's the left and the right pointing the fingers at each other, those that are from an ethnic minority and white pointing the fingers at each other, those that are more often than not in exactly the same position. You know, they've been neglected by their government. They are a lot of the institutional challenges are not just, you know, affecting people of an ethnic minority. They're affecting you know, poor white people as well. And the BLM, you know, movement has put a target on the backs of minorities to saying that, well, you know, we've got it bad, but actually, well, so is everybody else, hence the All Lives Matter issue. So what do we do about it? Well, I think I think there's you know, the education campaign has to continue. It's not about, you know, saying who's got it worse. I think it's just a collective realization that we all deserve better. You know, my problems are your problems are my problems, and that there's actually only really one group that are holding us all back. So we need to educate ourselves. We need to become more active. We need to recognise that solutions that are created by advocates don't just support ethnic minorities. They support those of a lower socioeconomic background from white communities as well. So we need that conversation to be happening, saying like, look, we're not the enemy, we're not the problem here. And if we work together, we can overcome this. I think how we respond to this in terms of the party, a lot of it is obviously around messaging. I think, you know, championing and promoting equality, liberal values is what we have and will always do. Ensuring that everyone has the same opportunity, you know, to progress through life safely, healthily, with a home over our heads, on the right side of the law and everything else. You know, we will always promote that. But I think if we're really going to be reflective of modern day society, then we need to shift the conversation from trying to remedy the woes of society that ethnic minorities face, to one of a more aspirational conversation as well, not instead of, but as well, saying that, look, this isn't just about, you know, ensuring that people are we remove the institutional barriers. We want to promote people throughout society, and not just say, you know, well, everyone sort of, you know, in this community is poor and impoverished. That's not true. You know, plenty of people are looking for somebody that appeals to them because of how they're going to embrace and acknowledge the work hard that people have done to get ahead, you know, to have a good life, to put food on the table, a roof over the head, and I think that's what we need to have a more aspirational outlook for our ethnic minorities, for our various groupings across the country, and we need to get out of our box. We're far too comfortable. We run often campaigns that focus on a very, you know, specific either area or demographic, and you know, all that does is entrench us within a dynamic or within a prism that we can't get out of. So yeah, we need to get out of our comfort zones. We need to start looking or creating more messages that you know, create an environment or set an environment out that people can aspire to rather than complain about. And I think that's where we need to go. Thanks.